that the session's titled kind of correcting or avoiding design mistakes. So let's talk about what a mistake is, or how I'm defining a mistake. I'm going to define a mistake as anything that you're going to do to cover up a bad design inside your data warehouse or data mart. So if you designed a database that you're using as a source and you've not really followed best practices for what will be useful in analysis services, there's a lot of tools that you can use inside of analysis services that are available, and they're nice features, but they're not necessarily best for performance and best from a usability perspective, but they will allow you to build a cube off of what you have as a poorly designed database. So that's mistake number one. You're doing something in analysis services to cover up a bad design that you have in a data warehouse. Mistake number two would be anything that's going to make it more difficult for your end users. So from a usability perspective, am I going to be making things easier for my end users, or am I making them more difficult by making these changes or these additions that I have? That would definitely be a mistake, and I'm going to talk about those a little bit as well. Mistake number three is performance. So is the thing that you're doing or the thing that you're adding to your cube going to slow performance? Well, that's obviously a mistake if you're doing that. Now, a lot of these things have some crossover, so things that you could talk about in data warehouse design could help performance, help or hurt performance. And this isn't a performance tuning session, so you won't hear, I've done performance tuning sessions where I talk more about the design, the engine itself that does queries inside of analysis services. I'm not going to get that deep into performance tuning in this session. I'll probably do a separate session for that. Rachel, you can't take my word on that. No, she's begging me to do some more sessions.
It's been a commitment. You all heard it.
Did the session? What was that, Rachel?
You've made a verbal commitment. Everyone's heard it.
But in this session, I'm not going to focus as much on the performance tuning aspects of it, more on just the design and how you can correctly design it to begin with. And if you do make those mistakes, how you can adjust and fix what you've done. Okay, so that's how I'm saying and that's how I'm defining a mistake. Now what we're going to cover is designing a data warehouse for analysis services. So there's actually some things that you could do inside your data warehouse to prepare it more appropriately for analysis services. There's some things that you would probably just do without thinking about that could actually hurt you building an analysis services database. I'm also going to talk about designing a cube from an end user experience for an end user experience. So making it so that it's much more likely that your end users will actually use the design that you create. I don't know if any of you, I'm sure many of you, I know I have designed this great database or great application or software or anything, whatever solution you've come up with, and you spend months and months and months on it, and then it just does not get utilized by the end users. Whether they just don't accept it, it's not as usable for them as what they have currently, or whatever the case may be. I'm going to share with you a few things that will make them more likely to actually use the cube that you designed, and as well as feel more comfortable with it through the whole design process. Excuse me. Then finally, we're going to talk about designing for performance. So I mentioned this isn't a performance tuning session, but I will have a few things in here to share with you that are very high level as far as things that you can do to help performance in a cube. Okay? Okay, so first things first. I talked about designing better from a data warehouse perspective or a data source perspective. And there's a couple things that means, really, is first of all, your cube can only be as good as your data warehouse design. So if you've done a data warehouse that's not optimal for a cube or hasn't been designed optimally for a cube, which we're going to talk about what that means here in a few moments, then you'll see performance problems as well as usability problems. So it may not be as usable from an user perspective when you've designed a data warehouse that can only fit into a certain mold with analysis services. The other thing here is, let me click over here. There we go. The other thing you need to keep in mind here is that the warehouse design should be done keeping in mind the entire time how this is going to work inside of analysis services. So from a performance perspective and from a usability perspective, you have to keep those things in mind when you're actually designing the data warehouse. And what that means is really don't do anything that's too unusual as far as the data warehouse design. Now when I say unusual, I mean how much you deviate from using a typical star schema. So if you have a typical star schema data warehouse, you're going to find things mold very nicely into analysis services. But as you start to snowflake it and build more and more complex object into your database, you're going to find analysis services can probably handle it, but it doesn't perform as well. And what I mean when I say that is really that you don't want to use analysis services features to cover up bad data models that you've designed. And I'm going to be more specific about what each of those things mean here in a moment. So first thing that I mean by that is parent-child dimensions. I'm sure many of you probably have these in your environment now. So a parent-child dimension, if you're not familiar with what one of those are, it's really anything that has a variable number of rows, variable number of levels depending on the data. This is my nice parenting picture here. So think of an example like an org structure. So Rachel works at Pragmatic Works, and so does Devin, and Rachel's Devin's boss, so he's underneath her in the org hierarchy. Or that would really be an employee hierarchy. You could have an org hierarchy that shows the different organizations within a company, and it uses a recursive nature where it just joins back to itself over and over and over to show how those relate to each other within a hierarchy. So it's a self-joining hierarchy that's built inside the database. The nice thing about it is it's nice from a database perspective is that you don't have to have as many columns. You can fit a lot more in a smaller amount of rows. The bad thing is analysis services doesn't handle them very well. It does handle them. It actually has built-in functionality for parent-child dimensions, but the bad thing is it's not good at doing aggregations on parent-child. In fact, aggregations can only be done on the key attribute or the very top attribute that you have in the hierarchy. So it's one thing that you definitely want to avoid is using parent-child dimensions when possible. So I mentioned this earlier that not all of these, I don't have a golden ticket to get you past all of these problems, but parent-child dimensions can be avoided when you know the number of levels that you're going to have in the hierarchy. Now, it's not always going to be the case for everyone, but if you know that you're going to have 10 different levels within that parent-child, then you can actually flatten that parent-child into a more naturalized dimension that you would think of typically. And there's actually a tool out there that I'll show you guys in a moment that'll do that for you. And I'll show you where you can download it. So what you want to do to avoid using parent-child is to flatten them into maybe just into a SQL Server view. So you like the style of having a parent-child dimension in your database because of the storage space that it doesn't take up as much. But you want to have the naturalized version or the flattened version of that table in the form of a view. And the reason that is because it works much, much better inside of analysis services when you're trying to actually display that information and when you're trying to aggregate that information. Now the tool that you can use, it's actually free. I'll bring it up here real quickly. If you go to codeplex.com, and I'll share this link with you guys. If you go to codeplex.com and search for Analysis Services Parent-Child Dimension Naturalizer, this is a free tool, and what it'll do is actually from within side bids, whenever you're browsing or whenever you're building your cube, it'll take a parent-child dimension that you already have and create a SQL Server view out of it, flatten it within the view, and then bring that into your data source view as well as into a dimension for you.